And I think to start with, I would want to acknowledge, I think, FIU for organizing this workshop. I think it's important that we dialogue over this critical topic. I also wanted to echo the same sentiments, I think, that were shared from the Reserve Bank in terms of regulatory pressure, which we are also encountering at the moment. I think the interest is there. We have a number of people that have actually applied or approached our offices seeking licenses with regards to virtual assets. So there is that interest, and I think the UN presentation also affirmed that position when he mentioned that we are ranked number 9 in terms of activity. So I think it echoes the same sentiments that there is activity which is going on. And as regulators, we cannot, I think, continue to close our eyes to it. Also wanted to respond to Philip when he asked whether we should be concerned about the source of funding. I think we should be. As regulators, I think this is where the AML issues come into play. We have to know where someone is obtaining their funds and whether it's clean money before we can allow it into our jurisdiction. So it's very critical that the source of funding is made clear. I also wanted to touch in terms of the direction which the country is going. And I wanted to remind the audience in terms of a State of Nation address that was delivered by His Excellency last year. I think most of us may have forgotten, but it's actually available online. If you go on the Veritas website, you can download it. And I just want to focus on the area where His Excellency mentioned something along what we are discussing now. So if you go on page 17, actually says, in the financial service sector, the Insurance and Pensions Commission Bill is set to empower IPEC to prescribe a minimum level of assets and liabilities. Then it goes on to say it will also provide for the establishment of the protection fund for policyholders and pensions and provident fund members. On the other hand, the Securities and Exchange Act should be amended to widen the definition of securities to include virtual asset service providers. This will enable the Securities and Exchange Commission to regulate and supervise virtual asset service providers on a risk-based approach. And this is our president who delivered this speech 7 October 2021. So exactly a year ago, I think there is acceptance at the highest level that we need to move in a certain direction. So I think at this point, in my own view, the die has been cast. Where we need to go, I think, has been established. It's now for us to actually come up with something that we can then actually go back to His Excellency says, this is something that we've developed in as far as the regulation and licensing of virtual asset service providers is concerned. So, and you also notice that he did mention that this was actually a task for the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is where I'm representing. And we have done something, and the model that we are leaning to is the Mauritius model, which is more of a hybrid between registration and licensing. I think the previous speaker from IMF did highlight the differences between the two. I think we are going for a hybrid between those two aspects. But I think the devil is always in the details, which I might not be able to share at this point. But I think in terms of direction as a country, we do have a direction, and something is actually being worked on in terms of the regulation for us. First point would be we have also been rated as, and technically we are very good in terms of having laws and guidelines. I think our major weakness, and I also speak from a regulatory perspective, is that if you look at virtual assets, there's a combination of the asset and there's a combination of the technology aspect of it. And I would be honest enough to say, I don't think where we stand, we have got the relevant technical skills at the moment to critically oversee that jurisdiction. So in my own view, I think an element of capacity building will be required. And I liked very much the presentation from IMF, where they were talking about, technical capacitation, which I think we can borrow from, because I think it's one thing to just have the laws, but it's the other to be able to actually implement the laws. And from where I sit, I think us as regulators would actually need some capacitation to be able to provide, I think, the oversight that's required. Yeah, that's what I can say for now.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I think you've done well. Let me try to stand, but most of you would have noticed that I'm having some bit of discomfort with my shoulder. The problems of trying golf when you're not very skilled at it. So I think you have sort of summed the way forward very well, because the last statement that you made about engaging the IMF to help us, I think the starting point really is that risk assessment. We have already heard from the different speakers that there is that general consensus that we really need to regulate rather than ban virtual assets. And whilst I think somebody mentioned that the issue of virtual assets touches across different regulators, so it is well and good if the Securities and Exchange Commission will be able to regulate it as a securities asset, but there will also be a number of other regulators who also need to come on board, because virtual assets also present themselves as a form of cross-border payments. So the central bank, obviously, the Exchange Control Department will be interested in regulating also virtual asset service providers insofar as they are able to enable cross-border movement of value. And similarly, the FIU would also be equally interested in regulating the anti-money laundering aspects of virtual assets. But like you said, I think the starting point for us is to do a national risk assessment. And I think the indication by the IMF that they are in a position to offer capacity building and upskilling is quite encouraging, and we should be able to engage them after this so that we proceed forward. I'm a little bit worried about the different approaches that even countries within the same region are taking. Others are embracing it. We are told Yellowcard that they've been licensed in Botswana. South Africa is taking a different approach, which is slightly ambivalent, and also equally Zimbabwe. I would have also wanted to see a situation where maybe at SADC level, for example, we come up with a study and a position paper where maybe recommendations can be made to countries as to perhaps the best approach. Then countries then make a decision, but after a very well-informed regional position. That's one possibility that we'll try to also sell to the minister to say probably why can't we, so that we don't really have this discoordinated approach at regional level, why can't we have such a coordinated approach so that we make that informed decision at the end of the day. So I think with those views, really, I think I will end it here. I think the speakers, and I thank all the speakers and the panelists, I think they've really done justice to the topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On the issue of fraud incidents.
Thank you for the question. So if I had to summarize the question.
Fraud incidents.
Thank you for the question. So if I had to summarize the question is, the people who have been scammed by virtual asset providers, service providers. And surely that means that the entire industry is an issue. And what must be done about it? So I think just to say there has definitely been a lot of fraud in the virtual asset industry. There's no question, particularly with exchanges where people have so-called lost keys, but actually have taken other people's funds. It's a real issue. It's a real risk. We have faced that particular issue ourselves. How do we look after client keys? And we've been in the game for now, we're in our 5th year, We've had to consult extensively across the world, banking experts, cryptography experts, exchange experts, and technological experts, security specialists. And there is only one way to secure private keys, in a way in which there can be strong confidence that those private keys can't be stolen or lost. It's called a multi-party computation. If I had to give it in a kind of a 30-second summary, effectively users need to be, the user login process needs to be separated in a server that's independent from the virtual asset service provider server. And those keys that are associated with those accounts need to be in another server that's separate. And these all need to be encrypted with encryption keys that are kept in separate servers. And there's an entire process around these things, and with security around these servers, regulatory bodies can be involved. But what it does is it gives people confidence that they know that their keys can't be stolen.
Thank you for that response. So we can
to be part of these very important discussions. Yellowcard is a Pan-African cryptocurrency exchange that operates in over 20 African countries. But we are yet to enter the Zimbabwean market, which we are very much interested in. I didn't prepare a presentation, but I just want to talk about the takeaway points from the presentation that I was here to listen to. And what I took away from that is one thing where he said that illicit use of virtual assets is mainstream now. So that being the case, I don't think we have a choice whether or not we want to ban or not regulate. We have to regulate, because no matter what we do, it's being used for illicit purposes. As a matter of fact, when I came from the airport a few minutes ago, I talked to the taxi driver and I asked him if he was aware of Bitcoin. And he was very upset that I mentioned Bitcoin, because he had lost $500 of his hard-earned money because of some scheme that he was told he was investing in. So that's just evidence that it's already happening. People are being cheated right here in Zimbabwe. So we have to absolutely regulate. As Yellowcard, our regulatory strategy is to apply for licenses in wherever they are available in the countries that we operate in. We recently were issued with a license, I'm sure it was mentioned in my introduction, in Botswana, and we intend to apply for them wherever they come up. Yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say for now. We have no option but to regulate. And I also echo the sentiments of my colleague from ZIMBOCASH. Everything that he says, we also have the same view as Yellowcard. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Viola. It was more on the pension side, but I think also related to data protection. I think one presenter mentioned the issue of our challenges with technology. I think we need some fortification across the country in terms of data protection, but with specific to the capital markets, I think our laws provide for minimum standards in terms of safety for clients' data, and also provides for confidentiality unless it's required either by legal requirements or some other form. But like I said, we are very good in terms of the technical side, which is the provisions of the law, they are there. But the practical side of actually enhancing the safety of that data is where we can improve. So I think it's a technological solution that's required, and probably that issue of capacity building, training can perhaps assist. But I think also the service providers, it means they have to invest a bit more in terms of the infrastructure which is containing this information. That's probably what I can say.
And the question that was asked was in respect of creating confidence in the market. In our view, when a country is able to, sufficiently implement the FATF requirements, that is a key pillar of creating confidence in the market. Why is this so? Because in going properly through the steps required by the FATF, the country would have started with a risk assessment to get a very clear picture of the threats and vulnerabilities associated with the sector. And this is important because different service providers will carry different risks. Different virtual assets will carry different risks. It's very specific to the service providers concerned and to the country's landscape. So starting from there, when the country properly does the risk assessment, it's going to involve private and public sector in that dialogue to get a full picture of all the risks involved. And then at the legislation stage, considering the entire landscape, AML-CFT is one part of it, but this doesn't exclude considerations such as consumer protection, maintaining confidence in the market, and ensuring that, for example, in a gray area, where there might be some overlapping, say, for instance, between the virtual asset space and the securities space, making sure that the regulations are, adequate to capture and to properly regulate the particular type of asset. So in our view, we would turn to the FATF requirements, and that would provide the direction that would not only provide confidence in the domestic market, but also confidence on the part of persons outside the country where they may be seeking to do cross-border transactions.
Thank you so much. The question is about so what notable scams do we see from crypto asset service providers? I think if you talk about the numbers, and I forgot to mention it earlier, between 15 and 20 of these crypto asset service providers decided to register with the FIC without any regulation in place. So they came forward and they register with us, and they are submitting valuable information. So we have worked on a number of cases in relation to cryptos, and I will just highlight a number of these matters. So the first one is where the exchange would receive a deposit on behalf of a third party. So typically when you want to bribe a government official, you will go and you will open up a account with a crypto asset service provider, and I will transfer the funds for that government official at the crypto asset service providers, and they will then allocate cryptos to that individual. That's the first scam. The second one that we've seen is fake coins and fake exchanges. So I would create the Albert's coins and then indicate to the community or to the general consumer that you can make a lot of money by investing on my cryptos. And when you start looking at the scheme behind, there's no cryptos, and I'm just taking money as a scam from the general public. Then the third one is illicit crypto transfers to the dark web. So where people use that for child pornography, abuse, terrorist financing. We've worked on a number of matters where terror financing or terror groups advertised on social media that you can transfer funds to the public key, and the public key is then being published on the social media, and we've were able to look at the blockchain, be able to follow these transactions backwards to crypto asset service providers in South Africa. The fourth one is phishing, where you would receive a phishing email. And then some of the software get downloaded, and normally the payment needs to happen in a crypto format. The fifth one is malware. We had a matter where a large life insurance company in South Africa with a victim of malware, they were able to log all of their data, And to unlock the data, that specific entity had to pay in Bitcoins to the criminals to get access to their own data. So using malware, they were able to ransom some cryptos or Bitcoins from these criminals. We also had a case where there was a kidnapping matter, and the syndicate were looking for cryptos or Bitcoins in terms of payments for the person to be released. Then the biggest challenge that we're having in South Africa in terms of cryptos and the abuse is money mules. So what the syndicates will do, they will approach a crypto asset service provider. They open up a large number of accounts, typically people that's poor and not educated. So they open up in their name, they open up crypto accounts, and then they start moving cryptos out of South Africa to foreign jurisdictions like China. And in this specific case, we were able to identify 1.7 billion that was moved outside of South Africa with 156 individuals. So you get a discretionary allowance from the Reserve Bank to be able to transfer funds outside of South Africa. The criminals open up various people's names, accounts, and they then transfer the funds out. How the crypto asset service provider were able to identify that is they were looking at the IP addresses of the people that was accessing these accounts, and that then led them to see that it's coming from the same IP address and MAC address in terms of the devices being used, and that they then realized it's actually the same person that's sending the funds outside of South Africa. I think that's some of the notable scams that we've picked up in our jurisdiction in terms of experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter, for to Philip on the proposal that he made on the dialogue and what it is that he wants to comment on.
Thank you for the questions. ZimboCash had two questions posed to us. So the first was, if I had to summarize, is what are we doing in engaging regulators? And the second is, are we regulated at the moment? I'm going to answer the second question first. We have, from our inception, we have followed very closely the regulatory regime in Zimbabwe related to virtual assets. And there's been lots of dialogue and discussion, but no definitive clarity. We are regulated. As much as an Apple company is regulated, as much as a store is regulated. We provide services. They are tech services, so we're regulated in the ICT space. We have user privacy that we manage, and so we are regulated like any normal company in Zimbabwe. We highlight our desire to be regulated specifically in the crypto space, and we understand that this is going to be a journey to get that regulation. I'm going to come back to the first question then, which is what are we doing to engage regulators? I did not say that we have not engaged the regulators, but you can infer that I'm here presenting at a regulatory conference, and that's all I can say.
Thank you so much.
I just recently joined. I apologize for being late, but I was on another mission. And I've heard a question which I think you referred to me with regard to the empowering law enforcement.
Yes, certainly.
And again, it's difficult to comment now because I haven't witnessed the whole session. So I don't know whether it's my presentation that inspired this question or, well, it's actually common sense that does that. And whenever we talk about regulation, we forget about how we're going to implement it. And the truth is that the implementation includes building capacities at all levels of the whole criminal justice system, stakeholders, and generally authorities. And the law enforcement are definitely in the forefront of this work, of this fight, if you will. And to answer it really quickly or briefly, what UNODC as the international intergovernmental organization does is that we are trying to fit it into a larger framework of anti-money laundering and CFT program, and prepare tailor-made programs and projects that would exactly tackle this issue. And these programs cannot be something short-term, as you've probably remember from my presentation, because they do include and they do require long-term engagement, education, training programs, and the most importantly, commitment from the beneficiary countries and subsequent changes in their organizational structure so they can sustainably proceed with this work further on upon the technical assistance provided by our organization, but not only our organization alone.
On risk assessment. Thank you.
Thank you, Viola, and thank you for those questions. To start with the difference between licensing and registration, allow me maybe to share some examples happening in other countries for more traditional sectors. So virtual assets is an emerging sector, but for the traditional sector, licensing is normally for, let's say, banks. A bank will go through a licensing process to operate in a country. That process will make sure that the bank has enough capital to conduct banking activities. They have the right resources in terms of human resources to run the bank. They have the right policies and procedures, risk management tools. It's very intrusive, and in some countries it might take a year to license a bank, for example. But that's obviously not the case right now with a lot of the virtual asset service providers, but it can grow into something that complex before they're allowed to operate. Registration, I'll give you an example from the non-financial sector, but also within the umbrella of the AML CFT framework. Gold dealers or precious metal dealers, those in a lot of countries are normally licensed by the authorities to conduct business. So they are given, an illegal person is formed, and the entity is provided a license to conduct the activities like any other business establishment in the country. Subsequently, they are asked to go and register themselves with an authority designated to monitor the precious metals industry in that country, for example. During registration, they will be asked to self-certify that they have certain requirements in place. But that's not, in licensing, on the other hand, the authorities will go and check themselves that they have all these requirements rather than allow them to self-certify. So licensing and registration may also lead to different supervisory approaches. In a licensing regime, risk-based supervision will require the supervisor to look at their sector and conduct a sectoral assessment, look at who's high risk, focus the supervisory resources on those entities, and also continue focusing on the remaining entities, but with less intrusive measures than high risk. On the other hand, in the monitoring approach, there might be more outreach conducted for the sector, with a focus on some of the higher risk entities, and maybe some inspections if warranted, but not on a regular basis as you would see in a risk-based supervisory environment. I hope those examples answered your question. So licensing more intrusive, registration less intrusive. On the question of whether we have developed a methodology towards assessing risks arising from virtual asset activity, now the IMF launched a technical assistance project which they've been working on a number of countries in different regions on virtual assets. And during that project, the next phase is to introduce that methodology for risk assessment. At this point, we are working with those countries to develop that methodology. This is an emerging sector, as we said, and our existing methodology for conducting a national risk assessment for money laundering and terrorist financing will be upgraded to include components of virtual assets. I also hope that answers your questions.
Yes, what have you been seeing in South Africa and how have you been responding to that?
Yes, in terms of the financial intelligence centers or financial intelligence units across the world, we belong to an organization which is called the Egmont Group of Financial Intelligence Units. There's around 160 of these financial intelligence units, and that allows us to get technical assistance from other FIUs, but also sharing of operational financial intelligence. So about 2017, we have received a request from Namibian FIU, and this was in our annual report. So I'm not talking about sensitive case information here. We received a request from the Financial Intelligence Unit in Namibia that a criminal committed fraud, and the monies were transferred to South Africa in two tranches, there's two payments to South Africa. When we start following the money, we realized that both these payments were made into crypto asset service providers' bank account in South Africa. We, at that stage, approached them and we realized that the one payment, the fiat currency were received, and they converted it and then allocated cryptos to the criminals in Namibia. Those cryptos were then transferred to a addressed, a public address which we could have identified was sent to Mexico. We again, with the Egmont arrangement, we sent a request to that FIU, and they confirmed that the money was again transferred to another jurisdiction, and they don't have control anymore over those funds. But the second payment, fortunate for us, the monies of the cryptos were kept on behalf of the client, and we were able to get a court order to attach that crypto account, and we were able to, the asset forfeiture unit in South Africa were able to sell that cryptos and be able to return the monies to Namibia. And fortunate for us, I think they bought initially for about 300,000 South African rands. When they sold it, it was about around 900,000 rands. So there was more money in the cryptos, or the value increased, and we were able to return more money that was actually being stolen on the Namibian side. So again, it's like a bank transaction. You need to follow the money. So the money would been on ramp onto a crypto, and then you need to start following the crypto. And if you can then follow that crypto and see where the money get back then into a fiat currency, you're able to attach that value and then be able to pay it back to the victim of the crime.
Thank you so much, Peter. Then the last question that was posed to the regulator. What's you doing, regulators, in as far as implementation of frameworks, models that are supposed to actually be prepared for us to determine our way forward? So I will give this to you, Director General, to respond.
Okay, thank you. So yes, like Philip said, you can infer from the fact that we are having this conversation. That's precisely the reason why we are engaging, so that we can inform the policymakers and advise them and make recommendations as to what we can do going forward. I can't say any more than that, really.
The response is loaded, right? Thank you so much, Director General, for that response.